welcome everyone into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Tommy Brzee. As always, it is Wednesday, June 19th. First of all, I just want to apologize for being a little bit late here. Had some technical difficulties, couldn't get the title to update on YouTube, but we're up now and we're ready to roll. But we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about Les Miles. He just sued LSU over some vacated wins that he believes are keeping him out of the Hall of Fame in college football. So I want to break down my thoughts on that. Then we'll get into a very interesting study that came out about lineman workouts, particularly in the summer, in the offseason workouts, and how they need just a little bit of tweaking throughout this next little bit. So we'll get into that and why I think it's a very good idea, frankly. Then we'll get into Nick Harbor. We talked about him probably about a month ago now, talking about his chances to go to the Olympic trials and possibly to the Olympics. Well, he's decided to not go to the trials and go back to Gamecock football. A huge win for South Carolina football for sure, but we'll get into that decision and why I think it's obviously huge for South Carolina, but maybe not the one that I would have made. Obviously, not a decision that I'm set to make by any means, but then we'll get to stock up, stock down. We did SEC yesterday. We're going to get into Big Ten today, so tons to break down there. Before we finish it out with some Wednesday what-ifs, and we have some really great ones out there, how teams adapt to having to use their second quarterback. Who are the contenders in that still, if everyone has to use their second string quarterback, I guess. But let's jump right in. Before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to kind of have a fun, interactive experience here, and I think that's always good for the both of us. Again, that is gsmcpodcast.net if you have any questions. I can also see the chat on the side, so if you want to just leave questions there, I'm more than happy to answer those as well. But let's jump right in and let's talk about Les Miles, because this is something that kind of took the college football world by storm over the last couple of days. Les Miles has filed a lawsuit against LSU, claiming that the school's decision to vacate the 37 wins from 2012 to 2015 eliminated his consideration from the College Football Hall of Fame. So he wants a remedy to that. That is what the case said, and definitely something that is going to be really interesting to watch. He is currently under the 60% win total that you need to be in the College Football Hall of Fame. I believe he's at something like .596 or something like that. So very, very close. But yes, those 37 wins are technically what is keeping him from being in that in the College Football Hall of Fame, hypothetically, or at least being considered for it. Frankly, a lot of my opinions on this are pretty short and sweet, I'll be totally honest with you. But first, let's get into what the actual violations were, because it's not as crazy as it was back then, that's for sure. According to the NCAA's release, the Level 1 violations date back to 2012, when a representative of LSU's athletic interests paid a father of a prospective athlete a total of $180,000 and $150, over a 5-year span as part of an embezzlement scheme. The athlete enrolled in LSU and competed from 2012 to 2016, which would be the reason for the vacated wins during that time. And the representative has been disassociated from the program for 10 years. So a lot going on here, right? I think a lot of us remember when these allegations came out, when all of this stuff came out, and when Les Miles' tenure at LSU was just tainted just a little bit. And frankly, I think my opinions are pretty cut and dry on this. Dennis Dodd wrote an interesting article on CBS about this, and he told all of the Division I schools he's worked for, Oklahoma State, LSU, Kansas, none of them have nominated him. And frankly, I think it's for a reason. I don't think he's a Hall of Fame head coach. I think he could get those 37 wins back and be above a 60% win percentage, and he still wouldn't be a Hall of Fame coach. It's no disrespect to him. He accomplished something in 2007 that a lot of coaches have been trying to accomplish for a long time, and a lot come up short. And I'm not necessarily trying to diminish that championship by any means, but the dude's not one of the best coaches of all time. He just isn't in my mind. I think he isn't in a lot of people's minds. If the rule was if you win a national title, you're in the Hall of Fame, there's a lot of guys that would get in that I would not necessarily love to get in, if I'm being totally honest. So it's no disrespect to Les Miles. What he did at LSU was really impressive, but what he did after that 2007 title, in my opinion, kind of held LSU back from being what they could have been. I think that offense was very, very benign, and it wasn't very scary to a lot of people, and it just made it the years that could have been, right there with Bama and fighting over the SEC and being right in the thick of things ended up being LSU kind of fading back as Alabama took all of the spotlight. So he could have the 37 wins back. In fact, I think he should have the 37 wins back. With all of the stuff that is happening today, all of the rules in the past kind of don't apply to current day college football. So I'm all fine with him having his wins back, but it just doesn't change the way that I think about him as a college football Hall of Famer. I don't think that he deserves to be in there. I think his last job at Kansas went over about as poorly as you could possibly do. He came into that job above the 60% win marker and then proceeded to go 3-18 over 2 years. So, I like the coach. I think he, accomplished something at LSU that was really, really impressive. I don't think he's a Hall of Fame coach. And that's just kind of the end of that conversation for me, if I'm being totally honest, because at the end of the day, he should get his wins back. It doesn't change the way I think about him. Maybe he'll get in. Maybe it's the way it'll change the way that others think about him. But for me, he's not a Hall of Fame coach with or without those 37 wins. But this gave me a good opportunity that I really wanted over the last little bit to jump back into the Hall of Fame talk, because there have been a couple of things that have happened over the last couple of weeks since I've talked about it the first time and said it's really a glorified museum at this point. If you're not including guys like Mike Leach, like Pete Carroll, like Peter Warwick, if you're not including those type of guys, it's not a college football Hall of Fame. It's a really, really cool museum, and that's incredible, and it's a very fun place to go. I've gone a number of times, but it's not a Hall of Fame as far as I'm concerned. So I wanted to get back into this because I've been trying to take a little bit of time to kind of calm down about this issue, frankly, to kind of mince my words a little bit, but it's been hard to do that because this is just a ridiculous system. I'll be totally honest. The moniker of winning 60% of your games is absolutely ridiculous. Les Miles should be eligible right now. Now, should he get in? I don't think so, but that's a different conversation. He should be eligible right now. It's what's keeping Howard Schnellenberger, who absolutely should be in, and Mike Leach, who is not even a question to me, should be in. Also, coaches have to coach for at least a decade. That's insane. People can come in and out of this sport pretty quickly, but have a remarkable effect like Pete Carroll did with USC. He's one of the best coaches that probably has ever coached in college football, and not having him in that Hall of Fame is just beyond ridiculous because he coached 9 years instead of 10. So that's ridiculous. And then having a player be a first-team All-American is just ridiculous. There's tons of really good football players in college football. There are tons of ones that will never sniff a first-team All-American because they play at Toledo or they play at Buffalo, but they mean a ton to those programs and they do incredible things at those programs. Those guys deserve a shot. That's just plain and simple. I don't think that should even be up for debate, if I'm being totally honest with you. That's kept out guys like Trevor Lawrence, Nick Chubb, Stetson Bennett, Colt Brennan, who absolutely should be in the Hall of Fame because he brought Hawaii on, national television. He brought Hawaii in the front of so many people that absolutely wouldn't even thought about staying up to watch a Hawaii game. They did it because that guy was on the field. So it's not even a question to me. A lot of these players, everyone that I just named, should be in the College Football Hall of Fame because all of them totally altered the way that college football is played, and also were just the best players in the country at the time that they played. They might have just been one notch below another quarterback or another running back or whatever. So it's one of those that I absolutely hate the parameters. You can't put parameters on a sport that is so variable, that is so different than every other sport. If you put all those parameters on an NFL Hall of Fame or an MLB Hall of Fame or an NBA Hall of Fame, that's all well and good to me. I have very little problem with that because everyone plays each other. Everyone is around the same skill level. There's not this big gap in ability and talent level. There is at college football, and you just have to account for that when you're going into the Hall of Fame. So But the one that I really want to zero in on here, I've made my piece about Mike Leach. He should be in. This isn't even a question. If team need to vacate wins and give them to Texas Tech to make it happen, I don't care how it happens. Get that guy in the Hall of Fame. I want to talk about Stetson Bennett because one of my favorite college football guys out there, Josh Pate, put out a poll a week and a half ago. I'm sure some of you might have seen it, basically just asking the question, should Stetson Bennett be in the Hall of Fame? He's not eligible at this point. He is not someone that can get into the Hall of Fame at this point, but leave those rules by the side. Should he be in the Hall of Fame? And 47% of the people that voted were just wrong because they said no. He is absolutely a Hall of Famer. And frankly, it's not even a question to me. I genuinely don't see the other side of it. Stetson Bennett is college football. He is the best story I have ever seen in college football. And on top of that, he was a really good football player. People will tell you that Georgia carried him. People will tell you that he had all the talent in the world around him. And yeah, he did. But so did a lot of quarterbacks before him at Georgia. And so do a lot of quarterbacks across the country. Not all of them win back-to-back titles. He went 29-3 as a starter, was a Heisman finalist, two-time national champion, brought a program that had really been sitting in that 10-2, 9-3 area that is kind of purgatory for some college football programs and brought them to the absolute top. And it's that guy. It was not anyone else because Jacob Eason tried to do it. Jake Fromm tried to do it and got pretty close but didn't finish the job. And then Stetson Bennett came in, and it was some mix of his swagger. It was some mix of his will to just not say no. It was a mix of a million different things. But that is the most important guy in Georgia football history. 90% of Georgia fan base would tell you that. The other 10% would tell you Herschel Walker. So it's a good argument between the two. But Stetson Bennett did something that has never been done at Georgia, has only been done a handful of times in college football. And one of the arguments I saw, obviously, was he's surrounded by talent. I don't care. I'll be totally honest with you. I just don't care. The dude has to make the right decisions. The dude has to put the ball where it needs to be, when it needs to be there, and he did it a ton. So Stetson Bennett is absolutely a Hall of Famer. And another argument was, well, if Stetson Bennett gets in, then A.J. McCarron's got to be in, right? Yeah, absolutely he should be in. He started one of the best dynasties we've ever seen in the sport. So yeah, A.J. McCarron should be in. It shouldn't matter how many guys you have around you. It shouldn't matter how incredible your team is. It should matter what you do on the field. And what Stetson Bennett did on the field was just out of this world incredible. So to sum this up, the Hall of Fame at this very moment is a little ridiculous. There's too many rules around what you need to do to get in, and who gets in based off, first team All-Americans, and if you've coached an X amount of time, if you've won a certain amount of games. All of that is ridiculous in a sport that is as weird, as variable, and as different as college football is. So guys like Mike Leach, guys like Pete Carroll, Colt Brennan, Julio Jones, Howard Schnellenberger, Nick Chubb, Trevor Lawrence, Stetson Bennett, all of those dudes are Hall of Famers. I have no question about that, but all of those dudes are not even eligible to be talked about to get in. That's insane. College football is a very weird sport that has a lot of nooks and crannies that we can't contextualize by on-the-field results. So I think it's a little ridiculous. I love the Hall of Fame. I think it's a really fun place to go. It's a very, very fun experience and the number of really cool things to see in there. But as of right now, it's a museum to college football and not a Hall of Fame. So if they change some of the rules, if they get some of the people in there that should be in there and maybe should have been for quite some time, as in Howard Schnellenberger and Pete Carroll, then I'm all on board. But a lot of stuff has got to happen. Do away with the rules and just let the guys in. This sport is very special for guys like that. So just let the guys in and let everyone really enjoy what should be what the Hall of Fame is about. But we'll take our first break. I actually went on such a rant there that I forgot to use the pictures that I had, but that's beside the point. We're going to get into a study after this that suggests that we change the workouts in the offseason for the O-linemen. Definitely a lot of hard workouts in the blazing heat that has caused a lot of troubles over the last couple of years. So I want to break down that and why I think it's an absolutely fantastic idea to alter some of these workouts. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Les Miles suing LSU over not being able to get into the College Football Hall of Fame right now. 37 vacated wins are what is keeping him under that 60% win total. I gave my piece on that. I don't necessarily think he's a Hall of Fame coach, but I think there are some other people in there that I wanted to get to, so I went on a little bit of a rant towards the end of that one, but let's get into a study that suggests that we should change offseason workouts for offensive linemen. And this is a very interesting thing that I'm sure a lot of us have kind of wondered about for quite some time. You know, there are a lot of college football programs that are getting together for summer workouts right about now, and there are a lot of people that are going to be in a ton of heat in the next couple of weeks and doing sprints and doing hills and doing everything in between to get ready for this upcoming season, and with that comes a lot of danger. Let's just be totally honest, the sport is dangerous in a number of ways, but the off-season is a place that a lot of stuff happens that is not ideal by any means, is a very dangerous way to kind of go about business in a lot of ways. So I kind of want to break this down, and I think there are a couple of things that are huge to remember here. Is one of the biggest things that this study kind of unfolded was, and the biggest reason for singling out O-linemen in particular, is football, by its nature, is a very specialized sport. There's a number of different things that people do, but if you are in a position, you do very specific things. Wide receivers do different things than corners do even. Offensive linemen do different things than defensive linemen. Corners do different things than quarterbacks, obviously. Kickers are on their own little land over there just kicking kicks all day. But the reality is, it's a team sport, but every part of that team is a very specialized position. So they don't necessarily need to be worked out the same. And in a lot of these off-season workouts, they are. So one of the obviously horrible things that happens is heat stroke deaths during this time of year with particularly football practices because of the extra padding and the extra heat. It gets pretty hot and it gets really intense, and some guys have, passed away from this type of thing. 97% of exertional heat stroke deaths, or EHS, from 1998 to 2021 were offensive and defensive linemen, and they were in the at-risk population. So this is just the reality of this sport. When you're going to have a year-round sport, when you're going to have, practices going from right now, it starts right now to the end of spring. It has very few breaks in between there. If you're going to do that, there's going to be risks that are going to be incurred, and you're going to have to do your best to make sure that those risks are not as big of a deal, and you can deal with those as they kind of come, and definitely not have this type of thing happen. So obviously you want to lower the heat load on these kids. You want to keep them out of the sun as much as you can. Obviously you don't want to leave, the principles of football, because it is a hard-nosed sport. Let's be totally honest. It is a quote-unquote man sport. Everyone that goes in because they're ready to take a licking. They're ready to get hit like that. That Teddy Bridgewater hit was a really mean one. But it's a problem that is so prevalent that something has to be done. You have to make measures in the other direction. From 1995 to 2021, there are 159 EHS deaths. That's 2.4 per year. From 2000 to 2021, that rose to 3 per year. So this is not necessarily a problem that's going away. It's not something that is going to be something that we can just kind of hope that it goes off the other direction. It's not going to. This is the reality of the sport. If you're going to be working really hard in 95-degree heat with, 30 pounds of pads on you, there's going to be risk of this, and you have to do everything in your power to make sure that these kids are as safe as possible. So one of the things that they threw out there in this study was possibly taking, at the very least, offensive linemen, taking their workouts indoors and having them be in air-conditioned facilities when they go through their workouts, and frankly, I'm all for that. I fully understand, you got to work hard to be really elite at this sport, and you got to push yourself, and you got to be in really uncomfortable situations. You don't have to be in dangerous situations because you're in plenty of those on the field. Let's just be totally honest. This sport is dangerous enough on that field when they step in between those white lines for them to also be worried when they step in between the white lines for a practice. That's just not something that should have to happen. I fully understand, you got to face adversity. You got to battle through some hard times, but it doesn't mean you have to, do things that are just out of this world crazy. Let's just be totally honest. You don't have to have 3-hour practices followed by sprints where the offensive linemen are out there as well doing the sprints. They're not going to need to sprint too much. They are going to have, certain moments where they're going to have to get after it. They're going to have to be able to go down after down and really fight. They're going to have to maybe run 40 yards and then set up and run a play really quickly to spike a ball on a late drive thing. But all of that doesn't need to happen every single day. We don't need to prepare them to do that every single play of the game because they don't need to do that every single play of the game, and it puts them in a lot of danger. So the reality is we have a very different sport where it is going to be a team effort. You have to bring everything together, but it's fitting puzzle pieces together. A safety doesn't play the same position as a corner because they have different responsibilities. The linebacker is totally different from what a edge rusher does or what an interior defensive lineman does. On the offensive side of the ball, a tight end is entirely different than a slot receiver, and you have to teach them different ways, and you have to train them different ways, and for the most part, at least, in these summer workouts, there is a lot of grouping everyone together because you do want to be a team and you do want everyone to go through those grueling summer workouts because that's kind of what builds bonds. I think everyone that's played a sport at a high level understands that. But at the end of the day, there is a fine line between, pushing your guys, making sure that you're getting the most out of them in practice and they're doing the most that they can do, but also not putting them in danger. And I think that's the ultimate goal here. That's always going to be number one on the list. Safety is absolutely the number one thing on the list every single time that a football team steps on the field. I understand you want to win the game. I understand you want to maybe knock someone's helmet off with a hard hit. I understand all of that stuff wants to happen, and I am fully in favor of a good hard hit. I'm not necessarily saying I want this sport to be softer or anything like that. I just don't want things in the offseason to create these type of problems when they don't have to. I don't think there's that huge benefit of that left guard running 40-yard sprints outside compared to, 100 feet away inside. I don't think that changes too much stuff. They'll be in the sun plenty. They'll work hard plenty. And at the end of the day, you just got to make sure that they're as healthy as can possibly be. They are in a good headspace, and they're not, suffering from things like heat stroke and not suffering from things like heat exhaustion, which get really scary really quickly. So I fully understand that this is the way of the sport to a certain extent. You're going to have your guys work really hard in the dead of the heat in summer. And you should, to a certain extent. That is what gets elite teams ready to play. That is what kind of separates the, elite teams from the not-so-elite teams, is what do you do in these type of months. And I fully understand you want to push everyone on your roster the same, and you want to not necessarily lean one direction in terms of you're letting certain guys off the hook when you're letting other guys not. But this isn't that. This isn't, letting offensive linemen off the hook. This isn't, letting them take their time and just kind of hang out during practice. This is just changing the circumstances of their practice, changing the location of their practice to make sure that they can go through it at full speed. And frankly, I would argue that if you take them out of the sun, if you make them, go back inside, I think there's an ability to work even harder inside because you have some of that energy. You are getting air conditioning. Some of the stuff that you've been dealing with outside is no longer there. You don't fatigue as quickly and all of those things. So I think it's a very easy decision, frankly. A lot of these places have some really well-conditioned practice facilities that they absolutely can utilize during this time. Now, not all of them do, so it might be a little bit tougher for some different places to implement some of the things that is talked about in this study, but at the end of the day, I think we can do just a little bit more. I think we've done an incredible job of making sure that the safety of this sport is as good as it possibly can be, but at the end of the day, there are certain things that happen not on a football field that can really, hurt a kid's future or end it right there, which is obviously the most horrifying case of this sport and definitely not something that you want to see. So I think this is kind of a layup of a decision. Try to make it happen as best you can. Make sure that the offensive linemen are not necessarily out in the heat for 4 hours a day and absolutely, tearing their body to pieces in the offseason because they're going to do plenty of that during the season. And as long as they're ready to do that when the season comes around, they'll be more than fine. So I really like this. I think this is a decision that likely will have very good effects not only for the health of these kids, but for college football overall because we won't have some of those horrifying headlines that come across our page every summer, it feels like. So obviously this is something I am a big time advocate of, definitely something that I'd like to see implemented. I'm sure there will be some pushback from the, big time old school football guys, but at the end of the day, this sport is dangerous enough on the field to where the practice field doesn't need to be a dangerous place too. So I'm fully on board with that, but we're going to take our second break and come back and talk about Nick Harbor. He curbed his chances to go to the Olympic trials, to come back to South Carolina and play for the Gamecocks this summer, and is a very interesting decision. So I want to break that down for you all right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the different things going on with O-line summer workouts and how there is a big study coming out that suggests at least that we should change the way that they're working out in the off season, especially in the big time heat. And I'm a full proponent of that. Anything that keeps the safety of the players at heart, I'm all on board for. So that is definitely something that'll be interesting to kind of watch develop over the next probably couple of years, really. But let's get into Nick Harbor, and let's talk about his decision to not go to the Olympic trials and find his way back to South Carolina football and get to work for this upcoming season. This is a guy that we talked about probably about a month ago when all of this started to happen, when he qualified for the Olympic trials, and I was fully on board with this kid going to the Olympic trials. I was very, very into this idea because I love dual sport athletes. I think it's something that overall, and I think in our sports culture, there's been a lot of, you got to be this one thing and you got to work on it since you're 8 years old, and that's the only thing that you can do, and that's the way that it is. But two-sport athletes tend to be the best athletes. A lot of the fantastic football players out there will tell you track or basketball was huge for them growing up, and vice versa. Some basketball players will tell you football was huge for them growing up. So I do think that this type of energy, letting kids go to the college level and play multiple sports, letting kids even go to the professional level. I would have loved to see Kyler Murray somehow make it work between the Athletics and the Cardinals. I think that would have been incredible to watch. But at the end of the day, it is kind of a changing of the guard. But Nick Harbor is one of those guys that could probably play 10 different sports if he wanted to be totally honest. This might be the single best athlete in the entire country. And he's a guy that I think is going to be huge for South Carolina coming up this year. So getting him back on campus is about as big as it's ever been. I think when you get guys, especially during these summer months, there's so much that can happen. There's so many things that can get refined. You can start installing plays. You can start doing some things that really will affect your upcoming season. Instead of kind of figuring out where you're at, figuring out the depth chart, doing some things that usually are done in the spring, now it's time to really gear up for the season, and having that guy on the campus and with your team is just absolutely huge. But this kid did leave a little bit on the table. He qualified for the Olympic trials. He ran a 20:32 in the 200 meters, was second-team All-American honors, finished 10th in that race, but qualified for the Olympic trials. He also hit a mark of 2020 in the 200 in the NCAA East Regionals. So the dude's just incredible. The athleticism is off the charts. In fact, if you are an elite football player out there in the high school level, do track. I'm just being totally honest with you. Every college football coach right now is going to look at track times, and if you can wow them there, you're going to get an offer. I'll just be totally honest. Track is the way to go 99% of the time. But apparently Nicholas Harbor spoke with the track coach over at South Carolina, Tim Hall, and they both came to the same conclusion that it wasn't necessarily going to be worth it. It sounds a little bit crazy with it being the Olympic trials, but he was likely not going to qualify for the Olympics. He was likely going to finish probably a little bit further back in the pack just based off times around everyone else, and was likely going to just not make the Olympics, and decided, why not, go prepare for the football season. First of all, go get some rest for a week or two and let your legs rest just a little bit, but then get ready for the football season. And then, maybe next year it comes back around and he has a better shot to make something happen in the track world. So it'll be really interesting to see what all of this kind of entails. I'll be totally honest. I would not have made this decision. It's obviously not my decision to make because I'm sitting in front of a camera and he is out there on the football field. So obviously I am not remotely on the same level of Nicholas Harbor, but I found this really surprising, if I'm being totally honest. I thought, Olympic trials are a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the vast majority of people, and I would have loved to see him running it. But at the end of the day, entirely his decision, and one that I'm sure Shane Beamer supports, and I absolutely support as well, because selfishly, I want this guy on a college football field as much as possible this upcoming season. I'd love to see him play both ways, if I'm being totally honest, which is something that honestly could be on the table. He's a remarkable edge rusher, at least was coming out of high school. I don't know how much work he's gotten there since he's been at South Carolina. I assume minimal, but you never really know what happens behind closed doors. I think this is one of those guys that is why college football is so special. You have certain guys that just kind of separate themselves from the pack in terms of athletic ability, in terms of just who they are. They walk onto the field and you're like, that guy's different. You can tell it right from the jump. It's the same thing that happened with Brock Bowers. Every time he walked onto the field, everyone in the crowd knew exactly who the special guy on the field was. And especially when it got in his hands, you knew exactly who it was. So there are certain guys that just transform the way that you look at these college football athletes. This is one of them. He didn't necessarily have a light the world on fire freshman season. Caught about 200 yards, 12 catches, nothing crazy by any means. But the kid's going to be huge for them this year. There's no doubt in my mind. Losing Juice Wells to Ole Miss was absolutely huge for them, and they're going to need someone to step up, and it's going to be this guy if it's going to be really anyone, if I'm being totally honest. So I think this is going to be a really, really fun thing to watch. Shane Beamer has to be just grinning ear to ear right now. He was one person that did push him in the direction of doing the Olympic trials because, as I said earlier, once in a lifetime opportunity. You gotta chase that goal, which I very much applaud him for, because I don't think there's plenty of college football coaches that would have done it, but there's definitely some that wouldn't have. Let's just be totally honest. And Shane Beamer seems to be one that puts his everything is second to his players. So very much applaud him for that. But you need this guy on your team. And South Carolina is a really interesting product this upcoming year because overall as a team, I don't love the sum. I think it's not necessarily the greatest group in the world. I don't necessarily think they're going to do anything wild in the SEC. That doesn't mean they don't have dudes. They have a couple of guys that I think could totally flip a game or a couple of games on its head this upcoming year. And Lenore Sellers is kind of a guy that I want to zero in on here for a second because he's got the rec specs, which I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite things in college sports, but I do think he's someone that a lot of people are maybe underselling because they just haven't seen him play. Maybe are just not as, gung-ho about this South Carolina team. I don't know what it is, but Lenore Sellers can play. He's going to add a certain aspect to their offense that they didn't have under Spencer Rattler with the running game. Now, I don't necessarily think he's going to light the world on fire, but he is a quarterback that could get under a defense's skin and maybe beat a Georgia or beat a Alabama. I don't exactly know their schedule off the top of my head, but beat a Clemson is a great example. So he's someone that absolutely can pull that off. The running back duo they have is really, really fun. Rocket Sanders and Oscar Adaway is one of my favorite in the entire country. I think both those guys are going to be absolutely really tough to stop for any defense they face. And then talk at Hemingway and Kyle Kennard, who came over from Georgia Tech this offseason. Both super talented guys on the front of that defense. So this team has players. They don't necessarily have the team that I think South Carolina fans want, or I would want to, have a lot of confidence in South Carolina, but they have the dudes. They have game changers, but all of those guys that I just named, fantastic players. They don't come close to what Nick Harbor could be for this team. He could be one of the best, I'm going to say it, one of the best wide receivers in South Carolina history at the end of his tenure. It is a lofty goal. It is something that absolutely is going to take some work and some luck to get done, but the kid is insane, and he can do things on the football field that not everyone, in fact, the vast majority of people cannot do. So I'm very excited to see him. I think if I was to rank the guys that I'm most excited to see play this upcoming year, he might be number one. James Pierce Jr. is up there. Caleb Downs is up there for another reason, which we'll get into tomorrow, actually. But I just can't wait to see this kid play. I want him on both sides of the ball. Another reason why we'll talk about Caleb Downs. It feels like this might be the year of the two-way player, but that's something we'll unpack tomorrow. Very excited to do that segment. Love having Nick Harbor 100% in college football, at least for the time being. Obviously, he will make his way back to the track at some point, and hopefully he has great success there as well. But him being a college football player is always a good thing. Whenever you can have the best athletes in the country on a college football field, you're doing something right. So very much like him being all in on the Gamecocks right now, I think it adds something to their team, and I think there's an ability there where you're not going to be able to walk into South Carolina and feel comfortable because that guy is on the other side of the field, and as long as they get that guy the ball often, it's going to be okay for South Carolina. So they're going to be a tough beat. I think Nicholas Harbor is going to be at the absolute center of that. So huge for South Carolina, huge for this program. Definitely keeps them at least a little bit more optimistic than they were probably a couple of weeks ago about this upcoming season. So definitely a huge pickup there. Definitely something that South Carolina fans were really hoping for the next little bit. But we'll see what happens there. We'll see what type of season he has. I expect it to be just absolutely insane. But we're going to take our third break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a little bit of stock up, stock down. We're going to get into the Big Ten today. Did the SEC yesterday, so now let's go over to the other powerhouse and do the Big Ten. So we'll do that right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Nicholas Harbor and his decision to not go to the Olympic trials and to start getting ready for the South Carolina football season. Very excited about that as a college football fan. Definitely something that I want to see on the field is Nicholas Harbor as much as you can possibly give him to me. So that's going to be awesome to watch. But to stock up, stock down. We're going to do this throughout the rest of the week. We did the SEC yesterday, got into a couple of teams that I really like going into the next little bit, and a couple of teams that, whether it's circumstantial or just where they are right now, I don't necessarily love over the next couple of years. But let's get into the Big Ten. There's a ton to break down. Michigan and Ohio State, I'm not touching. They're at the very top. Oregon, I'm not necessarily touching because I don't necessarily know where they fit in this entire world of the Big Ten quite yet. And also, they're likely towards the top anyway. But let's get into this and break down a couple of teams that I'm watching, and it starts with Nebraska, if I'm being totally honest. I don't think it could start really anywhere else. This team has a lot going for it this upcoming year, and this year could be a huge springboard for this team getting back into the national spotlight where they haven't been in quite some time. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens, but from talent acquisition to hype, they have something totally different than they've had in the past, especially under the past regime. It felt like the talent level was just the talent level, and it never really changed. It didn't really, continue to take steps up. Every single year that Matt Rule's been, well, it's only been 1 year, but they've only gotten better on the talent perspective and definitely bringing in the right guys. So very much like what they're doing. I think the guy that everyone's watching, the guy that everyone is going to zero in on, is Dylan Raiola. I apologize for that. He is a super talented kid, and he heads to Nebraska to essentially be their future. That is why he was dubbed the savior of the program, and frankly, he can be that. I'll be totally honest. He is a guy that, let's just say, over the next 3 years, he wins a Big Ten championship, goes to the playoff at least once, maybe is a Heisman finalist at the end of the day in his junior year, does some really cool things, and brings Nebraska at least a little bit more back to the national spotlight. This team is totally back. I'll be totally honest with you. If all of that comes to fruition, if this guy is exactly what Nebraska fans think that he might be, they're going to be dangerous going forward because they can capitalize on a thing that they really have a really interesting recruiting footprint because they're just kind of in the center of the country where you can extend your arm into the Midwest. You can go a little bit south, go into Texas if you want to, maybe into Louisiana. So it's going to be really interesting, and especially with playing teams like USC and UCLA, you can maybe make your way over into California a little bit to recruit as well. So it's absolutely huge what Nebraska can do over the next, I think, 2 seasons. This season is obviously huge just to give yourself a little bit better of a springboard going forward, but I think the next 2 seasons are as vital of seasons as you've ever seen in Nebraska. I think this is the chance they have to, at the very least, show everyone that they're not going anywhere. They're not going to, be gobbled up by the 4 other teams in the Big Ten that are coming in, and they're going to stand their ground and at least be a part of the conversation. I think from there, they can take off. It's just a matter of what happens over the next couple of seasons, so it'll be really interesting to see. But I think Nebraska has about as much stuff in order as you could possibly want them to have at this very moment. Some things have to happen, obviously, for everything to go the way they want it to, but right now, they're just really sitting pretty, to be totally honest. But let's move right along here, and USC is an interesting one, because this is one that really jumps out to me, but there are a lot of people that it doesn't jump out to. There are a lot of people that think they're just going to get totally gobbled up by the Big Ten and be kind of an irrelevant asset in the Big Ten in a couple of years. I don't think that way, and I think it comes back to I really believe in what Lincoln Riley is doing right now. I think he has totally changed his approach to the way that he wants to build a team, the way that he shows up to practice, the way that he deals with his players. Everything is just a little bit different. He has a certain edge to him that is just totally different than what it was at Oklahoma or even his early time here at USC. So it's going to be really interesting. But the biggest thing here for me is the recruiting patterns are very, very encouraging. They just are. There's so many things that they're doing to at the very least, attempt to become the team that Lincoln Riley wants them to be attempt to become the team that is going to beat you defensively, is going to hurt you, and is going to batter you a little bit throughout the game. Those are the teams that he wants, and he's done a good job of pulling in guys. He did lose Isaiah Gibson yesterday. He decommitted, and frankly, that guy's a Georgia Bulldog. If anyone wants some inside intel, I don't know if that had to be shared, because that's where he's going to end up. But at the end of the day, at least he's going after these guys. The goal is at all times with USC, especially over the next couple of years, just keep swinging. Take as many guys as you can on the defensive side. Some are going to decommit. Some are going to go to the big guys, because you're going to have to battle some really, really big-time players for these guys. You're going to have to battle Georgia. You're going to have to battle Alabama. All of these guys are going to be really tough to keep in your class, but the goal is to keep swinging. The goal is to pick up a couple of 4-stars and then hold on to them. And then maybe you pick up a 5-star and hold on to him. Justice Terry is still in this class. Maybe you do it with a couple more 5-stars the next time around. It's just about continuing to build this thing that you've started. Continuing to say, we are going to be a defensive team. We are going to try to batter teams, and bringing in the right guys to do that. You're not always going to win these recruitments. It is not an easy thing to keep these recruitments, especially with 2 guys on the defensive side of the ball in the state of Georgia. That's always going to be tough to do. But as long as you're swinging, you're going to do a good job. You're going to bring in a number of guys that would not have been there in the past, and likely you wouldn't have recruited in the past because they wouldn't have even thought about you. So the reality is, it's not going to be, a perfect linear path to the top, but he's making the decisions that he has to make. He hired the right defensive staff. He's doing the right things on the recruiting trail, and the offense is going to be fine. There's no two ways about that. So I think USC has the ability to really take the world by storm, not only over the next couple of years, but really next year. I think they can make some noise, and Lincoln Riley can become one of the top coaches in the country if he wasn't that already, and he was in my book, but some other people have cooled on him quite aggressively. But I love the direction of this program. I think it could go off the rails, but as of right now, it looks like Lincoln Riley means business, and he's not wavering from that one bit. So very much like this one, but it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But let's get into Maryland. This is a very, very interesting one, because both my stock down picks I just don't really like. I'll be totally honest with you. And it's not necessarily because I don't believe that they are going to slowly start to slip over the next couple of years. It's because I don't want them to slip, frankly. I like Maryland as a team. I love Mike Locksley as a head coach. I think he's done just an incredible job over there. But the reality is there's 4 new people rolling in. And all of those 4 new people likely slot above Maryland. You could make the argument that they could battle with UCLA for a little bit, but the other 3 definitely are slotted above Maryland just the second they walk through the door, which is not ideal. Maryland does not necessarily have a recruiting footprint that is special by any means, especially compared to the other guys they have around the country or around the conference. They're not going to be able to go out and get California kids the same way that obviously UNC and UCLA can, but even Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State can. They're not going to be able to necessarily pull away some of those big-time Pennsylvania guys from Penn State the way that maybe they would like to. It's not a good situation necessarily for them to really succeed in a world that is so much about talent acquisition and so much about the money that you're bringing into the program. Maryland's going to get the short end of the stick, and I wish they wouldn't, because I think there is an ability in this team where when you have someone like Mike Locksley, there's the chance that you have a 45-point per game type team and you can just score and hope that you win some games. But at the end of the day, I just think the future is not going to be overly kind to them, and I wish that wasn't the case, but don't necessarily love where Maryland's at, and I think Mike Locksley might just be a guy that I've talked about it before on this show, that there's going to be a lot of really good coaches that end up losing their jobs because there's just not enough wins to go around. This might be one of those guys, and I wish it wasn't, because he's one of my favorite head coaches in the country, but that's the way of the world right now. But the second one is kind of the same argument. Minnesota is in a spot where you just don't want to be totally honest. It's a very fun team. PJ Fleck's energy is just infectious. He's one of the most fun guys in college football, but there's just not enough wins to go around. As I just talked about, when you look at the Big Ten, there's a tier 1 with, the top level guys. There's a tier 2 with, I would say right now, at least, I would say Penn State, Michigan. Those are the kind of the sort of the tier 2 teams. There's an argument to be made they're all tier 1, but at the end of the day, the teams kind of in the middle of the pack are Minnesota, Maryland, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Michigan State, Indiana, Iowa, all of those teams. Iowa's probably tier 2 to be totally fair, but all of those teams, out of those 6 teams that I just named, Minnesota, Maryland, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Michigan State, and Indiana, the 4 at the end are the 4 that I feel much more confident in than Minnesota and Maryland. I wish that I felt more confident in Minnesota, but when I look at Rutgers, I think Greg Schiano is building something there that is really interesting and absolutely can play Big Ten football and at least be a tough out going forward. Wisconsin has, in my opinion, one of the top 10 to 12 head coaches in the entire country, and Luke Fickell, I think he's going to be incredible up there. Jonathan Smith at Michigan State is just getting his feet under him and absolutely will be a player because Michigan State has that ability. And then Indiana with Kirk Cignetti, I just feel really good about what he's doing over there. I think he's going to be a pest for a very long time in this conference, if I'm being totally honest. So out of that group, Minnesota and Maryland are just in a tough spot, and I wish they weren't. I think Minnesota's going to play their football. They're not going to throw the ball around too much. They're not going to light the scoreboard on fire. They're not going to do a ton of different things. They're just going to run the ball. They're going to take their spots when they have them, but at the end of the day, that pretty much plays into what the Big Ten does. They're going to have offensive and defensive linemen that are going to be able to batter you, and Minnesota just can't match that. Let's just be totally honest. So PJ Fleck is someone that I absolutely love. I think the energy he brings to a program is unlike really anyone else in the country. I think he has the ability to be a really good head coach, but as I said with Mike Locksley, there's going to be guys that get cut because they achieve probably what they were supposed to achieve that year, but it doesn't look too good on the record sheet, and it's not something that you want to deal with as a fan. So it's going to be really interesting to watch all of this unfold. I think when I look at all of these guys that across the country really might lose their job over the next year just because it's going to be really hard to keep your job in some of these conferences, it's definitely not ideal. So I absolutely hate the stock downs in this one. Frankly, I hated doing that to those two teams because I don't necessarily hate what they're doing over there. I think there's a lot of great things happening at Maryland and Minnesota. It's just the reality of the Big Ten. You have USC, you have Washington, you have Oregon coming in, and there's not enough seats at the table. That's just the reality. So it's going to happen in the SEC. It's going to happen in the Big Ten, but we'll move on to the Big 12 and the ACC. Hopefully it's not quite as aggressive there, but it definitely still will happen over there. But we'll break those down in the coming days, but we'll take our final break here. And when we come back, we're going to get back to Wednesday What Ifs. This is kind of a segment we started last week. Would love for this to be an interactive segment, so if you have any what ifs, then drop them in the comments and I'll get them into next week's show. But I have a couple on docket for today that I want to break down that I think would be pretty fun if they did happen. So we'll break them down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome everyone back to the show. We had a little bit of talk around the stock up, stock down segment we've been doing over the past couple of days. We got into the Big Ten and broke down some teams that I really like over the next couple of years and some teams that just circumstantially are not going to be quite as good as they have been in past years over the next 3 to 5 years. But let's get into Wednesday what ifs. Again, this is a very interactive segment, or at least I'd like it to be. So if you have any what ifs that you're wondering about this upcoming season that you want me to break down, drop them in the comments of this video and I'll absolutely get them into the show next week. But let's jump into the ones that I came up with for today. And the first one has everything to do with backup quarterbacks. I think there's a question around college football that happens pretty much every year where there's going to be a team that needs their backup quarterback. There's going to be a team that absolutely needs someone to step up at different times of the year. Last year it was Texas with Malik Murphy coming in and winning some just huge games for Texas down the stretch of that season that kept them in the fight. It happened with a number of teams throughout the college football playoff era. I mean, the best example, obviously, is 2014 Ohio State, who had to use not only second but third string, and the legend of Cardale Jones was born. But this year it's going to be really interesting. I was really thinking about this yesterday and wondering what team can withstand that. What team can kind of deal with that? We saw it happen to Florida State a year ago where they couldn't. They lost Jordan Travis, and the offense was very, very benign after that. In fact, they did probably more Wildcat snaps than they did to quarterback. So it was not ideal by any means. And you need a really good number two if you're going to compete at a really high level. And I wanted to get into first the top 4 contenders, the guys that pretty much everyone's talking about as the top 4 teams going into the season. And then we'll get into some others down the road here. But first, Arch Manning coming in for Texas would not be a bad thing. I'll be totally honest. I think everyone in that building has total confidence in this kid. He had a really good job at the spring game, although some of the passes were a little bit open. I'll be totally honest. I do think this kid is ready to go. I have very few questions about his ability to run this offense and run it effectively. Now, it would be, his first time starting a game or first time really getting high-level, big-time snaps. So it would be interesting to see what he would do out there in his first couple of snaps. But at the end of the day, I think this kid's ready to go, and I think Steve Sarkisian and pretty much every Texas fan out there feels very confident in what he can do once he gets on the field. UGA is another one I feel very confident in. Gunnar Stockton is going to be more than okay. I think he does take away a little bit of that passing ability that Carson Beck is really second to none in the entire country, but he adds something in the running game, and that is a huge dynamic that UGA really profited on when they had Stetson Bennett, was those read options that kind of kept defenses on their toes and made it really tough to defend. That's kind of the offense that you would see out of Gunnar Stockton, and I think it would be not necessarily quite as potent as the one that Carson Beck would run, but I think they'd be more than fine with all of the other stuff they have around him. And then Oregon bringing in Dante Moore was absolutely huge. I don't know how they did it, frankly, because if you bring in 2 of the top quarterbacks in the portal, I don't see how that's possible, but they did it. And it's made them feel very confident going into this year because, frankly, out of this list, I'd feel most confident with Devin Brown walking onto the field. He's not necessarily, the most polished guy in the world. He played some really good football for UCLA at times, played some not so good football at times for them. So it's been a little bit of a back and forth with this kid, but he's going to be good. Being behind Dillon Gabriel can only help his accuracy in the way that he sees the field and all of the progressions he needs to go through. So I feel very confident in this kid's ability throwing the ball, but also I think he's going to be more than fine once he needs to get on the, or if he needs to get on the field, which Jackson Arnold, did at times for Oklahoma a year ago. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but I would feel more than confident if I was an Oregon fan about that kid. And then you have Devin Brown, and I would also feel confident in Devin Brown. A little bit less than the other 3, I'll be totally honest, because I thought if Devin Brown was going to win this job, he would have won it in the spring, and the fact that he didn't is not necessarily super encouraging about the way that Ohio State looks at him. But at the end of the day, I think Will Howard is a good quarterback. I think he's a better quarterback than Devin Brown. I think he brings more to the table than Devin Brown does. I also think that if Will Howard was going to come in and totally take this job by the neck and totally dominate this job, it would have happened already. And he would be the runaway favorite to be their starter. Now, he's going to be their starter. I have no doubts about that, but he didn't necessarily separate himself too much in spring. So I don't think this would be that much of a drop-off. I don't think it needs to be, that crazy for someone to succeed at that position at Ohio State. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, but I feel more than confident. And then you get into Bama, Ole Miss, Michigan, Penn State. They would be in a little bit of trouble. Bama bringing in Ty Simpson or Austin Mack could work. Neither of those guys have played big-time snaps, but also some of the guys that I just named haven't played big-time snaps. So maybe these guys would be able to get by and play plenty good football. I really like both these guys. I don't know who the backup is right now, frankly. But at the end of the day, I think they would be able to execute the offense. I just think the gap between Jalen Milroe and them would just be a little bit more sizable than some of the others. Ole Miss bringing in Walker Howard would be very interesting to watch. I think he's a very talented kid. I just thought there was going to be a little bit more of a battle put up by him in some of these quarterback competitions. Obviously, this year, not much to be said. It was going to be Jackson Dart, but I don't know. I saw more from him, I guess, when he came over to Ole Miss than has happened thus far. So I don't necessarily know if Lane Kiffin feels overly confident in that kid going forward. Michigan moving to Jack Tuttle would just not be very good. I'll be totally honest. I like Jack Tuttle, and I think he's very interesting. But I think if Alex Orji starts to struggle and doesn't work out, I think you move straight to Jaden Davis and get him ready for the 2025 season. So that's kind of just a different way of thinking more than anything else. And then Penn State not only needs Drew Aller healthy, they need him to play really well. So that's not even a question. If they lose Drew Aller, it's cooked. But even if they have Drew Aller, it might not be perfect anyway. And then you have Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Kansas State, Utah, LSU. They'd be buried. They have good quarterbacks on those rosters. They have guys that can step in and execute the offense. They don't have guys that can get them to the playoff. They don't have guys that can win conference championships. So those teams would likely be screwed, frankly, if I'm being totally honest. But let's get into the second what if. And what if Georgia Tech beats Florida State in week 0? It's funny. I wrote this yesterday, and I was watching the Josh Pate show this morning, and someone asked a question about this, saying that Georgia Tech would win this game. I'm not necessarily going that far, but let's just say that happens. This one is a very sketchy game. This game is in Ireland. Georgia Tech is coming off a season where they did a lot better than some people thought they were going to be and had a really, really good offense. All of those guys are coming back, including their starting quarterback, Haynes King, who I've said time and again I am a very big fan of. Florida State replaces a ton on the roster side of the ball. That is a huge variable in Georgia Tech's direction. Also, I think this is going to be a low-scoring game, and you would think that would lean towards Florida State because they have the better defense and they can make some plays there, but the reality is Georgia Tech wants to limit the number of big plays in this game. They want to limit the number of plays that it takes to separate themselves from Florida State, and a low-scoring affair does that. So I think Georgia Tech, it might not necessarily be the way that they would want this game to shake out, where I think they would maybe be more comfortable in a 35-38 type game. But the reality is, when you start scoring points, there's a little bit more variability on who's scoring those points, and Florida State could pull away by 14, and then you're in trouble. If it's a low-scoring affair, you're likely within a possession, or at least a possession and a field goal away from being right back in the game. So I think that definitely plays into Georgia Tech hand just a little bit, but let's get into what would happen if this does happen. Florida State, this is just nightmare fuel. I'll be totally honest with you. I don't think Florida State fans have let themselves go there on losing this game because there would be a lot of people dancing on your grave. I'll be totally honest with you. There are a lot of people just waiting for Florida State to make that next misstep. And if you give it to them in week 0, especially with no one else playing, it's going to be tough. I'll be totally honest with you. Florida State would have to worry. It wouldn't change necessarily what they could do with the season. You know, they could still make the ACC title. They could still go to the playoff. They could still win a national title. But there would be time to worry, that's for sure. DJ would be very worrisome in this game if Georgia Tech were to win, and that would create a lot of questions. I think they'll be okay, frankly, regardless of if they win or lose this game, frankly. I think this program is still solid. Mike Norvell is still solid, but 2024 might go a little bit down the toilet in week 0 if they let this one drop. So it'll be an interesting game. I have not made a pick on it, although I'm not leaning one direction. I don't want to put that out in the world, but I do think this is going to be a game that you guys should be watching fairly closely. I'll just put it that way. So it's going to be really fascinating to watch over there in Ireland. Definitely going to be a very, very interesting one. But let's get to the last one. What if Colorado goes 5-7? I don't know if that's anything that Deion has even thought of at this point, and maybe he shouldn't, to be totally fair. Maybe he should just focus on all the good things that could happen for them, but this is on the table. I could go through their schedule and pretty easily argue that they could go 5-7, if I'm being totally honest. There are a couple of games that, yeah, I might have to twist myself just a little bit into a pretzel to make it happen, but the reality is there are 7 teams on their schedule that are capable of beating them. In fact, frankly, there are probably 8 teams on their schedule that are capable of beating them. So Deion has made this a problem. A 5-7 season wouldn't have been ideal by any means. It wouldn't necessarily be what anyone wants, regardless of what Deion says. But the reality is, it's one more win. You're getting a little bit better, and frankly, Colorado is a little bit better this year. They have a better roster. They're going to play better football. They have a better O-line. Shedeur Sanders is more comfortable back there. They're going to be better. I feel very confident in that. But being better and making the playoff are two wildly different things, and Deion promised making the playoff. That is why this is a problem. Frankly, to me, it wouldn't be a problem if they went 5-7 or 6-6 and moved on to the next season and said, we're going to continue to try to build this thing out, continue to try to get more talented, and at some season it's going to click. That's not what happened. Before, anyone even started talking about Colorado next season, Deion said, we are going to make the playoff. And he better, I guess, because I think even if he goes 7-5 or 8-4, which I think would be remarkable seasons, and I think they were very capable of doing that as well, they would get torn down because he made a promise that, frankly, his team is not able to keep. I really like this team. He's done incredible things to really improve the positions that he needs to improve, but from where I'm standing, they have 22 guys that are good. They have 22 guys that I feel very confident in, that I think I could throw out there and say, these guys can compete with most teams in the country. They can compete with, at least, let's put it this way, can compete with most of the teams in the Big 12. The 23 through 135 can't. That's just the way that Colorado has built this team right now. It can build out into a much better team and be a team that makes the playoff in the future, but when you make promises before the season starts that you're going to make the playoff, this stuff is not going to be good enough. 7-5 is not even going to be good enough, even though it probably should be. And especially if you go 5-7, you're in real trouble. So it's one of those things that 8-4, 7-5 would not be a problem. But Deion's created a problem because his confidence is part of what makes him an incredible football coach, part of what makes him who he is. But it also could lead to kind of his downfall this upcoming year because a lot of people are just waiting for them to have a rough year, and a 7-5 year wouldn't be rough, but people would tell you it would be rough. So it's going to be a battle. It's going to be one of those things that's going to be really, really tough for them to figure out. But the reality is, you created your own world, and now you got to live in it. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens with Colorado. I tend to have them right around 6 to 7 wins, so I think they're going to be better than 5-7, but 5-7 is not far off. There's no two ways about that. So I don't necessarily love the way that Deion went about it, but at the end of the day, he is who he is, and that's part of the reason that we love him so much. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Thank you so much for tuning in. Your support means a ton to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We just have incredible people doing work from every single sport you could possibly want. So come on over to GSMC and we'll have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Let's go.